Hello and welcome back to Zero Tackle TV, where we are reviewing the first State of Origin game for 2024. And here to break it all down with me is the NRL Chief Editor for Zero Tackle, Mr. Scott Pryde. How you feeling, Scott?
Well, as a Blues fan, you start to get used to losing, but otherwise, all good.
Yeah, you've been probably too busy at the Zero Tackle Origin hub, keeping that thing afloat to really get too upset about anything. So, but let's start. So we should probably start where the game was, probably won and lost really. So the send-off, Sua'ali'i taking out Reece Walsh in the first 7 minutes. Was that the right decision to send him off for the game?
Yeah, well, you're 100% right. That is where the game flipped on its head. I mean, it was really not a contest after that. Huge call from Ashley Klein and Liam Kennedy, who was in the bunker. Was it the right call? I'm not convinced. You see, I guess, tackles that are on par with that or even worse on not a weekly basis, but certainly regularly enough in the NRL season, and they probably get sin bins or sometimes they're just overlooked entirely. I know Sua'ali'i's tackle looked bad because he kind of made that direct, forceful contact and it was all front on and it was very messy. But, there are tackles with swinging arms and things that only get sin bins. Obviously, the match review committee have backed the referees. They've given Sua'ali'i a grade 2 reckless charge, which we don't see too often, and he's facing 4 weeks on the sideline with an early guilty plea now. So, let's get that out of the way. The NRL and the match review committee have backed their referees 100% on the decision. And on one foot, you have to applaud the stance they've taken. Head injuries are a massive part of the game. The NRL are working hard to stamp them out. So on that front, well done. But on the other front, you look at it from a consistency point of view and just wonder if maybe the decision was a bit over the top. I don't buy into the chat around its origin. It shouldn't be a send-off for that reason. I don't think that's right. We need to be consistent one way or another here. But again, I just think if that's the new line for where a send-off is, that's fine. But I think we'll then see an awful lot of them if it is. So, big call, huge call. Was it the right one? Yeah, again, I'm on the fence. I can see the arguments both ways.
Yeah, he did sort of lead with the shoulder, but also Walsh did seem to slip a little bit. So he probably wasn't expecting him to clean him up that high, but that is pretty much what happens. I think it's the right call, but
that was the big thing, wasn't it? Walsh did seem to slip into the tackle, which creates those mitigating circumstances around it. And generally, for mine, send-offs are reserved for reckless intent. I'm not sure there was reckless intent in that tackle.
Yeah, and he did, but Reece Walsh was off for the rest of the game, so hopefully he recovers. We'll get more into that later in the show, but, after that send-off, did the Blues get things right? Could they have done things differently? They did seem to hold off Queensland for, probably longer than expected, I thought, because I thought the floodgates would open immediately, but, how do you rate their sort of performance after the send-off?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Blues certainly could have let that get a lot worse. And I don't think the final scoreline really sums up the game. I think the Blues were a lot better than 38-10, particularly given they played with 12. But, I was saying after the send-off, I thought Queensland could have made that 50 or 60. We'll get into some stuff for Queensland in a little while, no doubt. But, I did think the Blues were quite good in the way they went about their work after the send-off. They fought hard, and I think the Blues of last year would have rolled over. The big thing for mine, though, I don't think Michael Maguire got things quite right with his interchange rotation and where he sort of sacrificed a position on the field. He talked about in the lead-up Hudson Young was probably going to play in the centres if there was an issue. Hudson Young didn't come onto the field till the 55th minute. Angus Crichton spent time in the centres. That didn't work. He missed something like 8 tackles. So it really, I'm not sure where Michael Maguire's thinking was there. Also, the bench rotation was really weird. I don't understand picking Jake Trbojevic as captain, leaving him on for the first 25 minutes, and then you don't see him again until there's 4 minutes to go. To put it in perspective, Isaiah Yeo coming off the bench played 55 minutes versus your captain playing 30, so I couldn't really get my head around that. Pomolola Kauatu was used in the middle. He played a very short stint. Couldn't really get my head around that one either. I think there were some questionable ones for Michael Maguire. There's no doubt that when you lose a centre to a send-off and you're playing with 12, your bench rotation does it gets certainly not where it was supposed to be at the start of the game. It gets thrown out of whack. But I think he went too far away from the plan in trying to get creative to cover the issue. And I think it may have cost the Blues in the end because they were right in that game for a period. Obviously, fatigue got him in the end, though.
Yeah, and I'm sure he wasn't expecting to be a man down 7 minutes into the game. But on the other side of that, Billy Slater's bench policy was proven correct. So is that something that the Blues should look to replicate in Game 2?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, kudos to Billy Slater for throwing it back on the bench. Obviously, Selwyn Cobbo came into the centres there, moved Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow to fullback, and it just worked brilliantly for Queensland. I mean, one thing you look at is that Queensland have had injuries in 4 of their last 6 origins, I think, leading into last night in the outside backs. And it, absolutely made sense for Slater to pick an outside back. He explained that in the lead-up. It was one of the reasons he did it. So, kudos to Slater. Should the Blues look to replicate it? Yeah, based on last night, you'd find it hard to argue they shouldn't. I think the big thing for the Blues is that, as we just talked about, Jake Trbojevic only played half an hour. Pomolo Kauatu only played 25 minutes. Hudson Young only played 25 minutes. If you've got 3 guys on the bench playing, 90 minutes between them, it means your starting forwards are spending a lot of time on the park, and it probably means you can get away with picking one less forward and picking, whether it be a specialist outside back or a backup dummy half, someone who can slot into the back line at points if there's an injury. The argument is certainly there, I would suggest, for Maguire to make that change heading into Game 2. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little while.
All right, so another guy that probably deserves kudos is Daly Cherry-Evans, the old fella, was awarded man of the match. How do you see that call?
Yeah, correct call. He was my pick at full time for man of the match. I thought he was superb for Queensland. Really orchestrated the attack, led things around the park beautifully. I mean, we've seen it before from Cherry-Evans at this level. He just stands up and gets the job done in the Queensland jumper. Billy Slater spoke glowingly about him in the post-match press conference, and most of his teammates speak glowingly about him every time they talk about him. And there's a reason for that. He's cool head, calm, collected. As I just said, his kicking game, is probably one of the best in the NRL. You look at the way he just lands that ball where he wants to land it every time. Very rarely puts it down the fullback's throat. And then, he also had that wonderful 40-20. He set up that last, one of the late tries with an intercept that, he read from a mile away. For 35, he's going all right, isn't he?
Mm. Yeah, he's still got those legs in him.
Yeah, no, just a superb performance, Cherry-Evans. I thought some of his teammates were in the mix for the conversation around the man of the match award as well. But I thought Cherry-Evans was definitely the right call. Real captain's knock. And Queensland need Cherry-Evans to be at his best when we go to Game 2 and 3. His kicking game, arguably with Nathan Cleary out, it always looks like one of the key differences between the two sides last night. And that's the way it proved.
Yep. Another one that was probably a bit of a surprise was Tom Dearden. So was that proven to be the right call to pick him for Queensland?
Yeah, absolutely it was. As we said in the lead up to the game, it really came down to a battle of 2 there between Dearden and Mam, obviously with Cameron Munster out. Let's start with the fact that Cameron Munster's an incredibly hard player to replace. He's played for Queensland for a number of years, never let the state down, whether that be at 5'8" or fullback or wherever he's been asked to play. There's a reason he's been one of the best players in the game for the best part of a decade. And he was always going to be very difficult to replace. But, Dearden's got runs on the board at origin level. I think he was the right selection from Slater. It was proven that way, even though I'd probably called for Ezra Mam to be picked. I thought Mam had a bit more spark in his game leading in, but Dearden was good last night. Yes, playing against a 12-man Blues, everything probably has to be taken into perspective a little bit, with a grain of salt in that way. But the way Dearden played, you'd argue that he's now got that spot locked up. Game 2 and 3, he's not going to lose it based on the way he played last night. Really cut the Blues defence to ribbons at times. Combined very well. Cherry-Evans didn't sort of step on Cherry-Evans' toes. They both played their own styles and did it very, very well. I guess it shouldn't really come as a huge surprise. Dearden's been in great form for the Cowboys. Even though the Cowboys have been struggling a little bit at NRL level, their form has been sort of up and down throughout the first 3 months of the season. Dearden, he's been fantastic. He's been the rock in that side, easily their best player. And he was in the best couple for Queensland last night. Certainly, not man of the match for mine, like some people were trying to suggest to me after the game. But certainly in the best view, and his spot is not in danger for the rest of the series.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of spots being in danger, you'd imagine the Maroons don't make any changes coming into game two. There's probably a bit of that question mark, obviously, over for Reece Walsh, copying that really that bad head knock. So, if he's missing, how do Queensland go about replacing him?
Yeah, well, Queensland will certainly be hoping they don't have to make any changes. You never want to change a winning side. They may have a couple of players coming back in the forwards, but even then, I'm not sure any of them will sort of press for a position based on the way they played last night, but if Walsh is out, I think the answer is pretty evident from the way they played last night. Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow is one of the best fullbacks in the competition. He's been electric for the Dolphins over the last 18 months. There's little doubt to me that he would probably be named in the number one. That said, Billy Slater does have some options here, right? Because, the talk in the lead up to game one, Reece Walsh was battling a little bit of a niggle in the lead up. The talk was that Selwyn Cobbo was going to play fullback. Obviously, when he came off the bench last night, he moved into the centres and Tabuai-Fidow moved into fullback. So that probably shows you where Queensland are at on who they believe their next fullback is, and it is the Hammer rather than Cobbo. You'd imagine then that Cobbo probably slots into the centres. He's been playing there for the Broncos this year and done a superb job, I questioned at pre-season. I wasn't sure how Cobbo was going to go as a centre. I thought his defence, maybe a little bit up in the air there, whether he could fill into that position, but he's done a superb job. So no doubt for me that if Walsh is out, Tabuai-Fidow goes to fullback, Cobbo goes into the centres, the back line will play as it did in game one otherwise. The big question, though, really is who would come onto the bench for Cobbo if he was dragged into the starting side. I don't think there's any doubt Slater would want to pick another back. I think the issue is there aren't that many floating around for Queensland that are at this level. There's a number of injuries which don't help. And I honestly can't give you an answer on who would come onto the bench. Would Slater go back to the well and pick? Kurt Capewell's coming back this weekend for the Warriors. He can play in the centres and the second row. Has never done a bad job for Queensland before. Would Slater go down that experienced line, or would he go back to a player, or not back to, but rather would he go to a younger player? Really up in the air there. I'm not sure which way he'd go. But there's probably some options. I think. Queensland obviously don't want Walsh out. That's where we'll start.
Yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle, and obviously, hopefully Walsh comes back in. But that's there's a lot of positives there for Queensland. They're good problems to have, but are there any negatives that you saw from them last night? They did seem to take the foot off the pedal a little bit, but what do you reckon?
Yeah, well, for all the credit we've given Daly Cherry-Evans and Tom Dearden and the rest of that side, if I'm a Queensland supporter, I'm a little bit worried by what I saw in patches last night. I know the scoreline ended up blowing out to 38-10, but 3 of those tries were in the last 15 minutes. And you could see there was a point there where the Blues were up, had all this energy, and then they ran out of energy and it went down really, really fast. And that's where Queensland ran away with the game. Up until that point, with sort of 20 minutes to go, I think it was a Xavier Coates disallowed try into a really poor Blues fifth tackle option and then into a Queensland try on the back of that. I think it might have been Ben Hunt who ran away and scored his second for the night. Up until that point, the Blues had been right in the fight with 12 players and Queensland didn't look like putting New South Wales away. With a man advantage at that level for 72 minutes, you should have that game dead and buried well and truly before the final 20 minutes, and Queensland didn't. So, you look at it and you go, are they as good as the scoreboard suggests? Maybe not if the Blues have 13 on the park for the entire game. Again, they did play well and they controlled things, but their attack looked clunky at times. Their defence, especially coming out of halftime, was a little bit poor. It was like mentally they switched off and thought they already had the game won, where really they didn't. The scoreboard was certainly not a blowout at halftime. And when Zach Lomax crossed for that try shortly afterwards, it should have woken them up. But it took a while for Queensland to get into their mojo in that second half. Even the first half, they looked a bit clunky. Yes, it's game one, and game one is often the most clunky in a State of Origin series because you've got new combinations, you've got players who haven't seen each other for 12 months. So there do tend to be issues in a game one, and that's why we've often seen game one be low-scoring affairs. Last night was the first time in 5 years that we've seen more than 36 points scored in game one. So that gives you an idea of generally where the two sides come into an Origin series. It's tight, it's low-scoring, lots of defence, lots of focus on that in camp. But if I'm Queensland, there is a concern over the clunkiness of that attack and the fact they couldn't put a 12-man Blues away. We go to Melbourne for game two now. generally speaking, that's normally a Queensland home game, but I'm not sure how much of a difference they'll make if they play like they did for the most part last night against, again, a team with 13 players.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the other side of that, what are the positives that the Blues can take out of that? So obviously keeping Queensland at bay for after the send off until essentially the last 15 minutes. What are the other positives that the Blues can take out of that loss?
Yeah, well, as you said, the way they fought for that jersey, the way they fought for their coach, the way they fought for each other, is not something that New South Wales have done in any time over the last 2 years, really. To keep a full-strength Queensland side at bay, a man down, unbelievable performance. But there are other individual performances they can take out of that game and look to as positives. I thought Zach Lomax's Origin debut was just fantastic on the wing there. Mm-hmm. He got involved, did heaps of hard work out of his own end, carried the ball strongly, defended okay for the most part, all things considered. Scored that try straight after halftime with a pretty good aerial effort. That was one of the reasons I think he was picked. He's excellent under the high ball. So I think Lomax was, probably the best debutant for the Blues and, among their best couple of players. Spencer Leniu was the other one. Off the bench, his selection was questioned widely, including by me. I'll put my hand up and say I probably got that one wrong. I didn't think he was really ready for the Origin arena, but he was one of the reasons the Blues were able to stay in that game. Things were starting to look a bit average just before he came on for New South Wales. You're starting to think this might get a bit ugly. I think Queensland had just run on a couple of tries and, things were going to get away from the Blues, but he flipped the tide of the game in the middle, brought tremendous impact off the bench. And, for what it's worth, his spot is probably secure now for game 2 and 3. As I said, was Leniu in the walk-up best 17 for the majority leading into game 1? No, probably not, but is he now? Absolutely. And then Reece Robson was solid, Cam McInnes was solid. So a number of the selections that Michael Maguire made where you look at and go, gee, that's a head-scratcher, or maybe I would have gone another way. Those players fought hard and did a pretty good job. So I think there are plenty of positives to take from the Blues despite the final scoreline. And, they'll now look to Melbourne and hopefully turn things around.
Well, just on selection then, so are there any changes that you can immediately see for Game 2 when they come to Melbourne?
Yeah, well, the big one's going to be Joseph Sua'ali'i. As we talked about at the top of the show, he's going to be missing for 4 weeks. If he takes an early guilty plea, he may fight this yet, and I think he might look for a downgrade at least back to careless, which would get him back to a 2-week ban. He's obviously not going to get off the charge completely, but I think there's a difference between careless and reckless. So he might fight it, but either way, a careless grade 3 would leave him out of Origin 2, so he's going to need to be replaced immediately. Who do the Blues go to replace Joseph Sua'ali'i is an interesting one because there are a lot of injuries. There are a lot of players who aren't on the park at the moment. I would suggest Jesse Ramian is probably going to be the guy to come in there in the centres. Bradman Best would be your ideal, but I'm not sure he's going to be fit coming back from a hamstring injury. I think he might have been picked if he was fit anyway, Bradman Best, but again, not going to be fit. So Jesse Ramian's probably the debutant for Game 2 to come in there in the centres. The other one is in the halves. Nico Hines was... there was a reason he wasn't in our segment about the Blues positives. He was pretty ordinary last night, went missing at times. And for a halfback, where the Blues did have the ascendancy at times, you have to remember that. Yes, they were playing with 12, and yes, that makes it difficult. But there were times the Blues were on top, particularly early in that second half, and there were some really poor fifth tackle options. The kicking game shouldn't be impacted that much by having 12. It's a individual thing. Hines really went missing at times. So does he get picked again for Game 2? Obviously, Nathan Cleary is out for the series, so the Blues have got a big decision to make here. Do they roll with the combinations they've used in the camp for Origin 1, or do they bring Mitchell Moses in? Moses has played Origin before, done a pretty solid job, and has just come back from that foot injury. He'll have another 2 NRL games, I think it is, before selection for Game 2. He's only played 1 back from that foot injury to date, but it was a good performance. He took the Eels to a win. The Eels have been terrible without Moses. They looked a different team with him back on the park. So Maguire's got a big decision to make. Does he bring Moses into this side, or does he stick with Hines? Again, you don't want to ruin the week of camp you've had leading into Game 1 because all those combinations get worked on. You spend a lot of time at training and all the rest of it. And to change it for Game 2 means you go back to start from scratch. I don't think there's any doubt Jerome Luai will still be the 5'8" for Game 2. Moses is, I believe, never played alongside Jerome Luai. So you're looking at a completely new combination if you do go back there. Plus, potentially Dylan Edwards comes back. He's been named on the reserves list for Penrith this weekend. The original fears around his injury being a 3 to 4 week thing look a little bit not correct, to be honest. Tedesco was pretty good last night, so there's a chance that he stays in the side. But if you pick Edwards originally, how do you then not recall him for Game 2 if he's fit? If you suddenly look at changing your fullback and your halfback for Game 2, you might as well throw the Origin 1 camp out the window and give Queensland a week and a half head start heading into Game 2. Big decision to make for Maguire. I'm not sure if I'd be pulling the trigger, to be honest.
Look, there's a lot going on. It's not all doom and gloom, as you said, but, with all that being said, the big question is, can the Blues still win the series?
As a Blues fan, I'd like to hope so.
Yeah.
But they now have to win Game 3 in Brisbane. I said pre-game last night, I said the Blues had to win Game 1 if they were going to win this series. And frankly, you then look at it and go, they've got to win in Melbourne as well, because the Blues record in Brisbane is atrocious. The Blues do not win in Brisbane. That's just a given. It is a very, very difficult place to go and play State of Origin football. Make it a decider and it becomes nearly impossible. The record speaks for itself of this Maroons side in Queensland. What the Blues need to do is go to Melbourne and put on a show. They need to play as they did last night, but hopefully with 13 players for the whole 80 minutes rather than 12. You have a 13th player out there, they may be able to take the chocolates in Melbourne. Obviously, you go to the MCG, it's a very different dynamic to a normal rugby league field because of the big oval, and that can throw people as well. So people who have played at the MCG before take an immediate advantage, and that's where Queensland, again, will probably have the upper hand because Daly Cherry-Evans has played there before. Can the Blues win the series? Look, yes, but it's going to take an unbelievable performance if they're going to.
Yeah. Look, stranger things have happened, mate. Scott, thank you so much for jumping onto Zero Tackle TV, fronting up after a massive Blues loss in Game 1. What can the people expect in terms of coverage for Game 2 at the Zero Tackle Origin Hub?
Yeah, so, we've got plenty of analysis coming out on site after Game 1 here in the 48 hours after Game 1. I assume this will be up sometime Thursday afternoon or potentially Friday morning, but there'll be plenty of analysis on site. And then in the lead up to Game 2, we'll be talking all the changes. We'll be talking all of what the Blues need to do to turn it around, what the Maroons need to do is stay on top. We'll have teams as soon as they drop on the Sunday night leading into the game. A week and a half of build-up, and then off to Melbourne for Game 2.
Beautiful stuff. I will chat to you then. Thank you again, Scott. And as he said, don't forget you can catch all the latest NRL news and Origin news at zerotackle.com, the #1 NRL independent news source. Cheers.